So as I'm recording this, the Pathfinder BattleCry playtest is nearing an end. I'm recording this on June 18th. Playtest data is open for submission until June 21st, so I'm probably going to release this after the playtest closes because I really don't want my answers to influence anybody. But I do want to give a commentary, not so much on the playtest classes, because there's plenty of YouTubers who will provide commentary there. I want to provide commentary on the playtest survey itself. Folks who know me know that I'm a physics education researcher by day, and so survey design is kind of my bread and butter. And I've always been very satisfied and very intrigued with Paizo's playtest survey design. And so I want to walk you through my completion of the playtest survey, not because I have so many great insights into the Commander and the Guardian, but because maybe I can help you learn a little bit about survey design and appreciate all the great work that Paizo puts into the survey itself. So let's start reading together. This survey will collect your feedback on the character classes from BattleCry so we can improve them for the final text. I appreciate the exclamation mark there to communicate enthusiasm. But really, this first sentence is super important. You always want to say what a survey is for, right? Number one, that gets you better information in terms of people want to help you reach the goal, but it's also important for disclosure to human subjects that they understand what it is that they're participating in. Now, you're going to hear me say things like human subjects, consent, things like that. Paizo is not an academic institution, and this is not academic research, so they're not beholden to a lot of the same rules and principles that we are over in academia. But I can tell they've got folks with some of the relevant experience when I see design choices like that. You can answer questions about any number of the classes. Okay, so that's an important disclosure, because what if I only play tested one of the classes? What if I only read one of the classes? How many you choose to talk about will affect how long the survey takes. So that's also important. You always want to tell people how long you expect your survey is going to take. Now, they don't really know because they don't know how much input you're trying to provide. So they don't give a number of minutes, but they are giving a statement about the variability of the time. And here's another important part. If you want to leave the survey and come back later, you can do so after you complete a page. So that's important for accessibility because not everybody can sit down for an hour at a time and fill out the survey, but maybe they can fill it out 5 minutes at a time and have it finished over the course of a week. So good on you, Paizo. When you return, use the previous and next buttons at the bottom of each survey page to find the class for which you want to take the survey or update your previous answers. Perfect. Also, I love the fact this is hosted on SurveyMonkey. Instead of trying to cobble together your own survey server, just use SurveyMonkey. It works great. It gives all the options you could ever want. It gets my thumbs up. All right, before we start talking about the classes, we'd like to know a little bit about you. Let's talk about why they want to know about you in just a minute. The survey is anonymous. None of the information given in the survey is linked to identifying information anyway. Okay, that's a very good important thing to state. Again, Paizo is not an academic institution. The problem with when I do research with my students is there's always this concern that somehow the thing they say on the survey is going to affect their grades, which it's not. I don't even read the surveys until after the semester is over. But this is good because this is such a tight-knit community. It's very important that we have this stated that this is not going to affect your experiences of Pathfinder Society, your experiences with customer service, your potential for getting freelance work at Paizo, anything like that is not affected by your survey responses. So that's very good to say. All right, let's take a look at these demographic questions. So they've asked for how experienced are you with Pathfinder? Have you played one or more sessions of Pathfinder Society or Starfinder Society in the past 6 months? How experienced are you with tabletop role-playing games in general? Which TTRPG have you played the most in the past year? So why is Paizo collecting this? I mean, what does this have to do with the survey? Well, what they're probably going to do, I don't have any insider information of this, except it's what I would do with this information, is they're probably going to use this information to disaggregate the data. right? So when they get all these answers about the classes, which we'll see those questions in a minute, they will probably want to group them by experience level, meaning I can take all that data, I can take all the satisfaction numbers, all the questions about how long did the combat last, etc., and I can group those, for example, into 5 groups based on experience. I can have, what did all my extremely experienced people say? What did my very experienced people say? What did my somewhat experienced people say? Am I not so experienced? Am I not at all experienced people say? Now, what they might also do with this is something we do sometimes with 5-point survey data, is you sometimes resolve that into 3 points. Why would you do that? Well, it turns out if you only give people 3 options, you end up over-reporting the middle category. So in other words, if they didn't have extremely experienced and not so experienced, you would probably get way too many under somewhat experienced. And so if I were doing this, I would probably bin the results by the 5, but then I would also probably group together these, because what is the difference between extremely and very? Well, none of this is quantified anyway. This is self-reported. But when you give these extra little shades, you might pull out some people who might be inclined to say somewhat, but find themselves between somewhat and extremely. And so that's why 5 is really the magic number when it comes to survey options. As long as you give a neutral and you give ways to give a couple different shades of either side of the polarization, you're going to tend to get a little bit better distribution than if you did only 3. 7 can be a bit too many. Right? More is not necessarily better. Like if you get a survey with like 13 responses, that's definitely too many, because you can't really reliably splice like that. But it seems like, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that we've grown up, our species has evolved with 5 fingers. But there's something about having 5 options on a survey that seems to really appeal to survey respondents. And so if I were parsing this data, if I were Paizo, I would probably bin this into those 3 groups instead of the 5. So how experienced am I with Pathfinder? I mean, I don't want to boast, but I am an infinite master, so I'm probably going to say extremely. Have you played 1 or more sessions of Pathfinder Society or Starfinder Society in the past 6 months? This part's interesting to me that they include or Starfinder Society, because obviously they don't include or Starfinder up here, right? Because currently those are separate rule sets. And so probably what they're looking for there is a difference in rules knowledge. That would be my guess. If I were trying to infer what's going on with number 1, I think they're probably looking for like general rules knowledge. Not that they shouldn't value the experiences of people who have very little experience, because you don't want your class to be so complicated that it's locked behind an experience gate with the game, right? You want it to be accessible to someone coming up new. But it is interesting to me that they mention Pathfinder Society or Starfinder Society here. That to me suggests that they're interested in binning these based on people with experience in society in general. Like, what is the society play experience like? I'm guessing that's where they're going with this. I have not played Society. I'm not disinterested in it. I don't have time. How experienced are you with tabletop role-playing games in general? So this is where I probably need to go with a somewhat, because Pathfinder is kind of my one thing. In fact, which tabletop role-playing game have you played most in the past year? Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Again, they're probably, I mean, this is getting much more detailed than I might expect, but again, they're probably going to bin these either based on the type of game. The nice thing when you're giving a survey is you can always ask for more options and then collapse down those options later to try to get some trends. But it is interesting to me that they list all those games. All right, let's go to the next page. Get on to the actual gameplay questions. All right, do you want to give feedback on the commander? Now, this is interesting to me because this is a yes or no question, but they give multiple answers. Now, why would they do that? Well, because this is not a simple yes-no, right? This is, I played a commander, I GM'd a commander, I both played and GM'd a commander, I did not play a commander, I do not want to take this part of the survey, right? So immediately, Paizo is capturing background information. Right, and so immediately, again, thinking about disaggregating that data, they can use this to say, what was this like from the player perspective? What was this like from the GM perspective? And so probably what they have is some conditionals in the survey logic that will ask you different questions based on whether you played, GM'd, both, neither, or whether you want to skip the survey entirely. So I GM'd a commander. You can catch that here on the We're Strong Together channel. And I want to take this part of the survey. So these are referred to as Likert-style questions. There's this whole literature base on whether the Likert term applies to the individual item or the whole class of items that reports on one construct. We use the term Likert because it's the name of the person who developed or who popularized. I guess you can't always credit people for developing things. They get credit for being the one to publish something about it. Likert was a researcher who really pioneered this type of survey where you have options that give different shades of responses to it, right? So extremely satisfied, very satisfied, somewhat, not so satisfied, not at all satisfied. Again, this is where you always want to have an odd number of responses because people need to see that neutral option, right? If you only gave 4, right? Imagine if you only gave extremely satisfied, very unsatisfied, extremely unsatisfied. And somebody says, but I was kind of meh about it. Like, you're immediately removing part of that population. So you always want an odd number. You always want some kind of neutral option there in the middle. Now, it is kind of interesting that they don't have an option that strictly says neutral. They've got 3 shades of satisfied and 2 shades of dissatisfied. I'm kind of curious about the thinking behind that. But I can see how, I think I can see how that kind of maps on, one of these two should map onto a neutral, I would think. Okay, key ability. Oh, hey, Paizo, quick note. You've got ability instead of attribute there. Oh, that's great. So this is kind of an interesting question to me as a GM because I didn't really interact with the commander's key attribute. In fact, my commander did recall knowledge once because the commander's key attribute is intelligence. And the commander did recall knowledge once as part of their, they took, what's the thing called? It's the one where you strike and make a recall knowledge check, and I'm drawing a blank now. I should have the PDF open next to me. I guess I would call that somewhat satisfied. I didn't really interact with the key attribute. The commander, to me, did not really play like an intelligence-based class. All right, but I'm not here to talk about the commander. I'm here to talk about the survey. Hit points. My commander did not fall. I gave them a moderate encounter. Perception proficiency, I didn't really notice, so I guess I'll say somewhat satisfied. I kind of wish for the GM that they gave an option of this didn't really seem to make a difference. Because as a GM, like, I don't need to know whether my PC is trained in perception or expert in perception. Number of trained skills, it wasn't a very skill-heavy encounter. Weapon proficiencies, they played with one weapon. Armor proficiencies seemed fine. Okay, this looks interesting to me. How interesting were these different mechanical options used by the commander class? Banner was extremely interesting. Okay, sorry, I'm supposed to be giving commentary on the survey. Extremely, very, somewhat, not so, not at all. Okay, they did give an NA here. I kind of wish they'd given an NA up here because as GM, I don't necessarily interact with any of these. I suspect these are just the same questions that they ask the players, and so this is probably just a blanket set of questions for that. All right, preparing and changing tactics. They didn't really do that. We played one encounter. Mobility tactics were extremely interesting. Yeah, I felt like those were fine. You know what? I don't think we ever used a drilled reaction, so I'll call that somewhat interesting. I'll say NA because that didn't come up. Oh, so I should say NA here because that didn't come up. There we go. I complained that there wasn't an NA and then I forgot to use the NA. But, there is something to be said about if you put the NA up here, people might be more likely to use it down here if that's appropriate. How powerful were these different mechanical options used by the commander class? Now, this is an interesting question because, there's resources out there for categorizing, like quantifying the power level, but this is a subjective scale. right? And so what I consider to be very powerful, somebody else might consider to be extremely powerful. And so if I were interpreting this survey data, the way I would probably parse this question, I probably would not look at the actual number of extremely, very, somewhat, not so, not at all. I probably would not actually look at those. I would probably look at, like, for each individual, what was their average and how did things deviate from that average. So for example, if somebody said that everything was very powerful, okay, that's interesting, but that person might, that particular player might tend toward thinking that anything is overpowered. I once had a player in my groups who, he read every class in the core rulebook and he described every class as overpowered. And with everyone overpowered, no one will be. And so, but the idea of that is that you take some sort of average within the individual's response and you report deviations from that, and then I would average over those deviations across the respondents. Commander's Banner, the other thing that I find interesting about this is, where does appropriately powerful come in? Because I feel like we tend to talk of game design in terms of overpowered, underpowered, appropriately powered. And I don't know how these options should match onto that. But then again, that's me talking as a game designer, and your average player is not thinking of it that way. Probably, maybe. I guess I don't know how the average Pathfinder player thinks of it. But anyway, I'm going to guess by this point, Paizo has a scheme for interpreting those responses. I would be super interested in seeing that. All right, preparing and changing tactics, we did not do that. Actually, I should have this open here so that I can provide the same NA over here. Mobility tactics, I'm going to say extremely powerful because we had a conversation about form up, which I imagine everyone's having right now. Offensive tactics seem very powerful. Drilled reactions, we gave an NA. All right, Paizo, I hope that's enough for you to parse this however you're supposed to parse it. How easy to understand were these different mechanical options used by the commander's class? Okay, now this, okay, so let's see. So this extremely, very, somewhat, not so, not at all in NA. All right, commander's banner. I really felt like all of these were easy to understand. Select the level 1 through 6 class feat you think is the most powerful. Okay, combat assessment. That's the one I was thinking of earlier. I don't feel qualified to give commentary on this because I haven't engaged in the feats in that great a detail. It is interesting to me the way they've divided this up. 1 through 6, 8 through 14, 16 through 20. Okay, I guess it's divided up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So, oh wait, no wait. You only get it every even level. Hang on. So that's 1, 2, 4, 6. That's 4 levels. 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. It's interesting to me. 1, 2, 4, 6. That's 4 levels. 8, 10, 12, 14. That's 4 levels. 16, 18, 20. Okay, it's 4, 4, 3. Okay, I was curious about the distribution of the levels there, but it's 4, 4, 3. So they're dividing 11 up into 3 buckets as well as they can. In the place is the commander's ability to drill a limited number of tactics with their squad mates during daily preparations, but can change these pure text in an additional 10 minutes. Would you prefer to see this function differently in the final version? Drill a limited number of tactics. So my comment on this is not about what they prepare. I think the number drilled is fine, but having a fixed number in the folio seems artificially limiting. I think an unlimited number of tactics, like a wizard's spell book, would be more appropriate. Rate your overall enjoyment of the commander class. I mean, I found it incredibly enjoyable. This was kind of interesting. You know, it's a star rating like we're accustomed to seeing from movies and things like that. I don't know if they'll take that as a number itself or if they'll use that to, again, disaggregate some of the data. But I could see this being useful as like getting a quick, temperature check on the class itself. All right, let's move on to the next page. This section collects your data and opinions on the Guardian class. I GM'd a Guardian and I want to take part in this survey. That's me. How satisfied were you with this class's basic statistics? Key attribute. I'm honestly not so satisfied with it being a strength-based class. I would have preferred it as Constitution. Hit points, satisfied. Perception proficiency, it didn't really come up. Saving throws seemed fine. I don't really remember it one way or the other. Number of trained skills seemed fine. Weapon proficiency, armor. I was really intrigued by the... I know we're not really talking about the class, but I was really intrigued by getting the armor specialization stuff at first level. That was cool to see. How, again, okay, so these are formatted the same way. How interesting were they? How powerful were they? Guardian armor never came up. Intercept strike was extremely interesting. Taunt was extremely interesting. Threat technique, I remember that coming up. Okay, so the other thing they might be doing with this is if somebody like me responds to both the commander and the guardian, they can compare our levels between those two, and they can say, well, it seems like on the whole, one was more interesting than the other, one was more powerful than the other. How powerful were they? That didn't really come up. Intercept strike was, I would call that extremely powerful. It essentially nullified a crit. Taunt was fine. Taunt was more complicated than powerful. Threat technique was... I remember that coming up once. How easy to understand. All right, this is where we need to get into some feedback here. Because Guardian Armor was extremely easy to understand. Intercept strike was fine. Taunt was... This is where I might be quibbling over words. Taunt was easy to understand. Like, I could read Taunt and understand when you would use it, what it would do. The actual implementation at the table was a bit cumbersome. And so I'm not exactly satisfied with the wording of this question of understand. Like, I wish they would kind of bifurcate that into a couple different stages there, but I understand why you don't want your survey overloaded with too many items, right? You always want to think about how long the survey is going to take. Survey fatigue is a very real thing. I think you need a free response to follow up to that, maybe. Threat technique was fine. Let's see. Oh, the level 1 through 6 class feat that was the most powerful is definitely larger than life. All right, the Playtest Guardian forces an enemy to attempt a will saving throw against their class DC with taunt. We did it this way to reduce the dependence on an attribute that isn't the Guardian's key attribute score. For example, having the Guardian roll intimidation check. That is fair. That is very fair. Which following options do you prefer? Playtest version, skill check. Yeah, I don't think it should be a skill check. Other, please specify. I prefer the playtest. Well, you know what? I was going to give a commentary about the key attribute here, but that's actually not what they're asking. That's actually not what they're asking. That's not fair of me as a survey taker. Because see the problem with having an other, like you need an other. You absolutely need an other option here. The problem with an other option is if somebody says, I prefer the playtest version, but I want some other thing changed that's not really germane to the question. Now the survey reviewer is in a bit of a pickle where do they count that as I prefer the playtest version? Because the survey is going to report so many % gave other. And then do you go back and back count that? Is that really fair? Like, yeah. It's tough. It's hard to design around that. In the playtest, the Guardian's taunt grants the target a bonus to attacking them and a penalty to attack the Guardian's allies. This incentivizes the target to attack the Guardian instead of their allies, but doesn't guarantee it. Which of the following options do you prefer? I prefer the playtest version. I would prefer taunt gives stronger incentives to attack the Guardians, bounced by the risk that the action could have no effect. I prefer taunt force the target to spend at least an action attacking the Guardians next turn without bonus penalties, bounced by the risk that it could have no effect. I don't know, because the issue that my group ran into was that we had 2 Guardians in the party, and that was where it became ridiculously cumbersome to track who had bonuses and who had penalties. I don't know. I really don't know. I think I am going to go other with this. I like the playtest version. Overall, it became difficult to... The effects became difficult to track over the combat, especially with 2 Guardians in the party taunting different enemies. I think some simplification is in order. Maybe replace one of the penalties bonuses with a modification to the degree of success. You know, crit fail becomes fail, hit becomes crit, etc. Overall, I enjoyed it. It was a fun class at the table. Okay, the other thing they might do with this, again, they might do some sort of correlation between the star rating and the complexity of the class and the power of the class, etc. Is to say something like, you know, people rated this as complex, but it didn't break their enjoyment of the class. Whereas people rated this as complex and they rated it low. Yeah. So if I were parsing that data, I would probably do some kind of like 4-quadrant graph where on one axis I would have high star rating, low star rating, and then the other one I would have like responses to one of the questions, and I would look for if there was some kind of correlation between the two to say like this seems to be the thing that makes or breaks the Guardian experience, something like that. All right, and here we are done. So that was the Pathfinder BattleCry playtest survey. Overall, I'm very happy with that survey. I thought it was well designed. I can gain some inklings of what they might be doing with their with the data that they receive. And I hope that commentary was helpful to you as you complete surveys like that and think about what folks are doing with it, or as you think about designing surveys of your own. All right, thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. We are strong together.